All right, Gary. It's 3:10 in the morning. It is Mardi Gras, and I live in New Orleans. So, as such, apologies if these response videos are not going to be as prompt as they would normally be. But I want to say a couple things, right? Because you've published a magnum opus in response to me. Something like 4 hours of content in response to, 2 videos at a comment. So, how do we do this? How do we even begin? First of all, the key moment in those videos is when I said I'm not a consequentialist, and you replied so well by saying, consequentialist? What does that mean? You don't believe in consequences? You don't believe in cause and effect? Now, this immediately should strike everyone who watches this video as a problem. Very deeply a problem. Again, this was in part 4 of your response. The reason why it's a huge fucking problem is that consequentialism is the #1 school of ethics going around. It's a school of ethics that I don't subscribe to. So, what this means immediately is it's like saying, I want to argue about evolution. Who's Darwin? What's speciation? I'm going to take a very strong stance in evolutionary biology, but I don't know what these things are. So, the moment you admit that you don't know what the word consequentialism means, and in fact there's multiple words in my video that you don't understand, that anyone who's ever cracked a book on the subject of ethics, period, the most facile pedestrian reading of the subject of ethics, would be able to recognize and say, all right, I understand that language. I might not agree, but I understand that language. This is trivial, right? This is initiate, novice kind of stuff. There's nothing that I've said that really gets deeply into the issue of ethics. There's no language that I've used that is, someone accused me of being esoteric. But I'm not, really. I am using the language that any ethical philosopher would use. So again, from the very fact that you don't know what the word consequentialism means in this context, I can deduce, I think quite confidently, and please, my subscribers, tell me if I'm wrong to draw this conclusion, but I can deduce quite confidently that you have never cracked a book on the subject. You have no background on the subject. You have no concept on what ethics is, or how ethics functions, or how to establish ethical claims, or how ethical claims have been established in the past. You are totally alienated and disconnected from the discourse that we're talking about. Again, much like a creationist is disconnected from evolution. It's like watching Ray Comfort talk about evolution, the way you talk about ethics, or the way you talk about how I talk about ethics, more like him. Now that might be, I'm waiting for the ivory tower, comments. But fuck, seriously, ethics, it's not like it's something reserved for a privileged few. You can read Aristotle's Ethics and understand some of the language. You can read the Critique of Practical Reason and understand some of the what's going on there. You can, like, all of that material is available. It's not like there's a hidden cabal of ethicists somewhere. No, there's a history of ethical thought. And I'm using language that's right at home in that history. And the fact that you're so divorced and so disconnected from that, I think immediately, like, it gets my goat to when you start to make really strong ethical claims and shout down other people who don't make those claims. So that's a first, at first blush, that's the thing that bothers me. You don't know what the fuck you're talking about, and yet you want to have a strong opinion on the thing that you're talking about, right? Again, just like a creationist. There's another question. You're calling me a nihilist, a moral nihilist. But what you don't recognize, and you don't recognize this because you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. What you don't recognize is that there is a difference in the use of the word value. Value has more than one meaning. Right? If I talk about the value, and I talked about this in a comment that I just posted on your video a couple hours ago. If I say the value of $1 is X, right? That obviously means something very different than if I say autonomy is an ethical value. Right? These are two different concepts. These are two different words, even. They're homonyms. Right? They're words that sound the same but mean something different. You are arguing for value in an economic sense. You are arguing for a cost-benefit analysis. And as such, I think it's incoherent. And the reason why I think it's incoherent is because it's arbitrary. That's the fucking point I'm getting at. Is that the way you are talking about value situates it in the same context as talking about the value of the dollar, which is arbitrary. The value of the dollar goes up, it goes down. It's intersubjectively agreed upon. Do you get this? The value of the dollar is something arbitrary. It's something perpetually changing. It's something that's intersubjectively negotiated. And this is how you're talking about the concept of value, right? You're putting things on scales. You're talking about things in terms of instrumental reason. If you don't know what that fucking word means, then look it up, man. So value, not plural, value in the sense of this economic cost-benefit analysis, the value of the dollar, are arbitrary. That's the point. You are relativizing value the moment you put it into this economic framework. Values, as such, values in a moral framework, there's another problem of the moral and the ethical, which you don't seem to get the difference between. Because, quite seriously, if you can give me any evidence, a shred of evidence, one piece of evidence, for the idea that the word moral is more theological than the word ethical, I'd love to see it. Because as far as I'm aware, Kierkegaard uses the word ethical in talking about Christianity. Right? Every Christian philosopher uses the word ethics. The word morality, on the other hand, really comes up with the Enlightenment. It comes up with the Metaphysics of Morals by Kant. That's the first place I'm aware of the use of the word. And the point was to establish a morality that was not God-given, even though he was a Christian. Moral is the more secular term in the history of thought. And if you can find me one shred of evidence that says otherwise, if you think the moral non-cognitivists are theologians, then you don't understand moral non-cognitivism, right? So no, you don't know what these terms mean. And the reason why is because you don't have an interest in the subject. Fuck, what was I talking about? Values in an economic sense versus values in a moral sense. Values in a moral sense are not relative. And they do not exist. They are a property of the concept of something. Right? So if I talk about love, it is innate to the concept of love that it is good. That I'm prepared to affirm. It is not something relative. It is something, this is another problem, subjective in the sense that it requires a subject in order to make sense. Objects don't love. Objects don't have value. Rocks, which is an object, a rock is an object, does not have value. In that sense, it is subjective. But it's not subjective in the sense of merely subjective. It's not subjective in the sense of it's your opinion versus mine, or something like that. So again, we find equivocation between different uses of the word subjective. Subjective as something to do with the subject, and subjective in terms of something that somebody pulled out of their ass. Right? Different senses of the term. So we have these words, and these words, which are very, very well developed in the history of ethical thought. And somebody who's taken an Ethics 101 class will fucking understand the difference between value in an economic sense and value in the sense of something like autonomy